64 convert based on which you can send it, and I guess we talked about it in the past, and it will be somewhere in one of the Git repos or in one of my blog where there is a way to, I don't remember which repo was it, but I'm pretty sure that I have written a blog about it
Okay.
with API how to send a PDF file, but there's a limit in terms of size that you can send. Okay,
Okay.
so yeah, just maybe drop something on the chat and then later on I'll remember it and I'll send it to you.
Yes, I believe, Saurav, it's 320 MB that is being converted to base 64.
Yeah, something like that, right? Yeah, we did talk about it, right? Yeah, here
Yes.
it is. It's the Git repo called import attachment and export attachment. Import attachment API is a repo, and you can surely see the code. Everything is here about the tables that we have used for it, an attachment table, and then there was a set of API pages to. Uh, the one is the API page, I guess this one, which lets you send out or receive document in this bit 64 converted to use that, sir.
Okay, sir.
Whenever you need.
I will check. I will check and confirm.
Yeah, and there is a, I'm pretty sure there's a blog about it in my blog where it kind of shows you the demo of it.
Okay.
Okay, anything else before we start going?
Now we can start.
Okay, so welcome all. This is our 87th VC Open discussion, and we are continuing our discussions about SharePoint file management that we are doing from last 2-3 weeks. So let's do a quick recap of all these things that we have covered, and then we'll move ahead. So the minimum permission that we understood in last 3 sessions that you need to give to your OAuth app that you create are these. The SharePoint site search is required because we are searching for a site on SharePoint, and then to read and write data into the SharePoint folders, we'll need these 3 permissions to be assigned. After that, using the first session, if you remember, we discussed about access tokens, and these were the 2 methods that we have used. As Sandeep sir have mentioned in the past, do a consent from as an administrator, and then not everybody will have to get a consent. But if the customer that you are building it for would require to get consent from each user, then these are the 2 methods that you'll use from the OAuth to auth code unit to get either from the cache, which means the person have already uh, granted the consent, and if it is not gets from there, that means the consent is not provided, and then we use the acquire token by authorization code, and this in both the cases returns you the access token, which is the last and second last parameter here. Then we went ahead and we had some problems, and to my surprise, those problems were only happening when I was sharing screen. So I don't know. As Sandeep sir tried in the last session offline and it was working fine. And after the session, I again tried and everything was working fine. So maybe it's something around screen sharing or something like that. I don't know. But these were the 3 URLs that we used, the graph APIs. The first one is to find the SharePoint site where we would like to import and export document from. And then inside a site, SharePoint site, you have different document libraries where you can store files. So this one is used to fetch all the document libraries that are there. And then inside document library, if you want to go to another level, then you can also use the directory that is residing inside the document library. So these are the 3 uh, API calls that we did till now. And just to show you here, this is the OAuth app that we created, and here are the permissions that I just showed you. Then going forward in the SharePoint setup, uh, the if I remove this document library, so it's assuming that I'm inside the site right now because I have entered this, which is this SharePoint site. And then in this SharePoint site, we have different document libraries. Okay, I always get confused here, but I guess it's somewhere here. So inside a site, you can have multiple document libraries. So when you click on this, once you have keyed in the site and the system have generated the site ID, you can do a lookup. It'll show you all the valid document libraries which are available. You can choose your document library. And then inside that document library, there can be one or multiple folder where you would actually like to store files. So let's say there is only one folder. So you'll not get a selection window in this case. It'll automatically fetch the specific folder and these IDs will be assigned, which we'll need going forward. Those who haven't seen the code in after the last meeting, I did some changes, not changes, but make it a little bit more generic. The first one is to get all the IDs, either the site ID, the document folder ID, or the folder ID, which returns the name and the ID. And this uses a global variable of what type of HTTP request I'm doing, which is get in this case. And then it calls a generic function called call graph API, which just does a call, gets the OR token in the header, sends the request, and based on the response, it sends the request here, and then based on the response, if it is success, it reads it and then returns whatever the response that came out. Once the response is back, it checks for value. As we have talked in past, that every graph API will return you a JSON array with the value as the name of the array. And if the value is returned, then it'll read the JSON response using this method, which does this. If the return value is a single value, then it directly returns as we saw in the folder selection. But if there are multiple values, then it uses a temporary table to show a lookup action to the user to choose which file the folder they would like to choose from. And then these are just supporting function to generate the lookup data and all, and you can surely read through it. Any questions? Anyone who have tried it till now, I guess. Okay.
Nothing as of now.
Okay. So if nothing, then the next thing that you're going to do is upload and download a file. A upload request in SharePoint, and you can surely read Microsoft SharePoint documentation about it. A graph request would be something like this, which is the first part is static, which is graph microsoft.com, the version of the graph that we are using, the site where you would like to place the file, and inside after the site we need to specify the site ID, then the drive ID where you would like to place it, and then the folder ID and the file detail, which is the file name. If we just call this method, it'll directly go ahead and import that file into that SharePoint folder, which we have specified. So without wasting much time over here, I already have generated a method, so I'll just copy it and paste it here. So let's paste it somewhere here. Okay, and let's talk about it. What we have done here is to upload a file, we'll need the folder path, as I said, the file name, and the stream which contain that file. So we'll need a file in a stream so that we can upload it into the SharePoint. And then at the end of this function call, what happens is it returns the download URL, and I'll tell you how it returns the download URL because that's what we'll need to download the file. This is the API call that we are doing, as I just showed you in the slide deck. what we are doing is we are validating that the setups exist or not, which is just to make sure, or maybe I can remove it. It's okay. So this just clears all the global variables so that nothing is from the cache of the last call. Then the past URL which we are passing is the upload URL, which get substituted these %1, 2, 3, and 4 with the site ID, the document library ID, the document folder ID, and then the fourth is the file path, which is the folder name, folder path, and file name. You can keep the folder path blank, and I'll walk you through what that means, and then the file name that user would like to import. The request at this time is not a GET request, it's a PUT request to place the file into the SharePoint. So that's why we have initialized this with a PUT request. Now, in this particular case, when we will call the Graph API, there will be an overload to the actual Graph API. So the earlier Graph API was just send me the past URL and I'll give you the response. It was in case of when we are doing a GET request, that you give me an URL, I'll call that URL and I'll return you the response. In this case, because we are uploading a file, we'll need a overload or a second method with the same name with an additional parameter, which will have the stream, which will actually store the file that we need. So let me see where I have done that. This is call Graph API. Okay. So I'll create one more call Graph API here, which now have 3 parameters. One is the pass URL that you would like to call, the response, and this time it will also pass the stream that need to be sent. What happens in this case? This part remains same, calling the default header, setting up the authorization, setting up the URL that we would like to call. But in this case, we are doing a PUT request, as we said here. If the request is of type PUT, then we will have to write whatever is on stream into the request that is going to SharePoint. So whatever is coming from the stream is get written into the request content. Once it is written, then it just does a send call of that method and then the response that it will return. At this time, again, we'll check is it success or not. And if it is success, which is in our case, it's a PUT request, which means this, it will read the response and return the JSON response back. Once the JSON response is back into this, we'll read it and we'll try to fetch what's in the response. So maybe for the time being, let's comment this out and let's see what the response is. So JSON response, or do I even need to do that? Okay. Oh, sorry. Like this. And in this Graph API, before it returns it, here, I can just also let's see when we try to send a file, what kind of response we get. But when we have to upload a file, we'll have to do it from somewhere. So let's try doing it from a page extension on customer card or customer list. Page extension. Okay. List. Okay. And let's quickly add an action into it. Okay, well, let's keep it simple so that we can see it create. The action and upload file. Okay. And on the action of this, what we would like to do is I'll just use whatever is there already. Save time here. Action. Okay. Fine. What I'm doing here is doing the upload at this point, and then this is just a pop-up for the user to select a file. Once he or she selects a file, it directly calls the upload to SharePoint. And let's comment this part. We'll utilize this later. Okay, so at this point, we should see something with a message. If this time the screen share during screen share it works. That's the only surprising thing that's happening for a while. Okay. So we'll see the response that kind of comes once we try to call that URI, and we'll see that does it gets uploaded there or not. So somewhere here there should be an action import file. Okay, this dialog box is coming from this upload into stream action method, which let user to select a file. If user selects a file, let's say ticket to Bangalore, this is the response that I'm getting out of it. Okay, so let's copy this into my JSON beautifier, something like that. Okay. All right, let me put it here and let me beautify this. What happened to this? Oh, it cannot beautify, but okay, let's understand it here. What the written URL is coming as that there is a file that's going into this particular drive, which is the drive ID, and then inside that I'm trying to place a file, and at the end of it, it also returns you a graph download URL, and this is the JSON. So this name value parameter will remain as it is. This download URL is the actual URL that I can use if I have to download this file. So let's see where it ends. That's why I was looking for the beautifier here. So if I directly call this URL, I should be able to get access to that file, or that file should get downloaded. If I do that, it downloads the file automatically because the file already exists. It added a name into it, which also means that the file should be available in the SharePoint right now. There it is. So now for the download part, once the file gets uploaded, what I'll have to do is I'll have to read the response that I'm getting after uploading the file with the value that is assigned to this key, which is Microsoft graph.download URL. Once I get the value attached to this key, which is this value, then I'll have a URL which I can call to download the file anytime in future. So let's click OK here, and let's go back into the code. It's here. So what I was doing here is once the response is back, and I guess I did the message here, so let me remove that. Okay. Now this will respond it, and once the response comes here, then what I was doing based on the response that I received, I was trying to get the key for which I would like to get the value out of it, which is the download URL. And whatever returns in the token as a response of this get, then I was trying to store it into this return value of this method, which is the download URL. So far, so good.
Yes.
Okay. Now this will get returned to the calling page, which in this case is this page, and we'll get the download URL into this text variable. Now, what you do with the download URL is now based on what your customer wants. I didn't want it to overload it with a new table or a complex system. So I thought, why not we create a method called add record links. What we'll do is we'll create a method here to add a record link with, let me see what the parameters are. Is which is my okay first record ID of type record ID. Then I will have the file name, a past file name of type text 250, and then the download URL, which is download URL again of type text, is I guess is 2048 now in the record link table. Once it is defined, let's create a variable of my record link of type record. Once it is here, it's straightforward CAL or AL code, you want to call it. Okay, and then in the record link, I'll need the record ID, which will be equated to the past record ID.
Saurav, I think you need also the record link management, don't you know? Because you'll write in the note.
Sorry?
You need the record link management code, you know, as well.
Why?
Because you will be needing to write the note.
I'm not writing the note. And
No.
let me tell you what I'm thinking. And yeah, if it makes sense, why not? We can surely write it like that. I'll say the description is normally the file name, so that will be the past file name which user have selected, and then the URL one will be the past download URL, and then the record link is of type link, and then if we need, let's do a record link dot user ID, which will be equated to user ID. And then there is one more field, I guess, on record link, which is when for which company it was done. So you can get the current company, the company name. And that is, I guess, everything that we have. Link ID, record ID. We are done with URL 1. URL 2, 3, and 4 are obsolete. They are going to be removed in future. We have given the description type. We're not using note. That's it. Created user ID we have done, company we have done. We don't want to notify anyone. And other are system field, which gets automatically inserted. Let's try to publish this now and see what happens when we publish this. Now, there are ways that if you would like to directly download from SharePoint, that we can surely talk about. But if you are planning to start from uploading from Business Central and then downloading the file, then you technically don't need a download logic, because you will have a reference, whatever way you would like to use it, stored inside Business Central. So if you would like record links, you'll get there. As Sandeep sir was saying that he prefers using the documents, sorry, the attachment area. In that way also you'll have the record link, sorry, the URL assigned there. Okay, so let's test it out. If I do import file for customer number 10,000, and this time again, let's pick another file. Let's say GitHub recovery codes that I have. It's done. If you want a message, you can surely add it. But this, in summary, what happened at the same time is in the attachment section, you see a link got created with the file name that I just keyed in or selected, and then a URL attached to it, which you don't even have to read as a user. You can just click on it. It'll take you to that go to the SharePoint directory, download that file for you whenever you need it. That way, you don't have to write a logic to download the file from SharePoint. As in, you can surely write it, but then you'll have to store details about it, like what is the file name that is in the SharePoint. And if somebody changes the file name in SharePoint, that kind of breaks the logic again. Yes, and Sam, you were saying something about the note. What was that?
No, I thought you'd be needing to write the notes, like not just attach, but add a note as well.
What a note will do, if I, let's assume if I write a note, what's purpose that will solve? Note is kind of used to notify someone in my, earlier it was used to be to someone to notify in my organization, because there used to be a notify to, which I don't see here now in the new version. Because normally what happens in the older versions of NAV, that you get a drop down of people to notify, which I don't see now. So I don't think how Node will help. Sandeep sir, you were saying about the attachment section. So when you go with this route, what you store in this area in that case?
So everything remains the same. The only thing is, instead of using media type, the field, that value that is getting assigned in the that particular field, blob basically, which
Yeah,
was origin. We just share that the same URL in another field, custom field.
in the custom
And
field. Okay.
and when you click on this one, if you just attach on some file on it. So now this basically, this field has code written over it.
Yeah.
So there we put the condition that if the setup is say SharePoint, then instead of opening this file, the default logic, it will open up that link.
Okay, and the file will never get stored in the
No
system.
way.
It'll just be the
No.
link.
Otherwise, it will become duplicate. Very
Right.
difficult to manage.
Yeah. And it also increases the space of the database in summary.
So that's the whole idea. Instead of storing these files in the 80 GB limit
Yeah,
of Business Central.
that makes sense. Okay, any questions on the code that we saw? Here is the code unit, I guess, that we were talking about. Yes, it did change from the last time, as I promised last time that I'll make it a little bit generic, which is I didn't want it to write all the Graph API codes in every method. That's why this call Graph API, which gets the URL that you would like to point to and returns you the response. That way you can just parse the response separately based on what kind of query you are doing. So for the gets, majorly for all the get requests where you don't import a file more or less, this would becomes a call graph API which just does a get call and returns you the response as JSON response, which then you can process based on whatever situation you are dealing with. Like here it is, in this case, it was dealing to give user a lookup based on how many values are returned from it. And that happens by reading the array and generating the lookup data with this method, which reads these two parameters, IDs and name, and write it into the temp buffer out table. And that temp buffer out table is then used for user to look up and select one of the available option based on the return values from the graph API. And that's it on this one. And then the other overload that we did on the graph API, which we just did today, is specifically around doing a put request, which is if you are doing a put request, then you also have to write whatever is in the stream into the request content so that the file can get uploaded. Now, technically, if you also would like to do a download file, that's also possible, which just have the similar kind of pattern as the graph one, as the upload one. So you can also create a procedure if required. Let's do that, which is, let's say, download file from SharePoint. And that will also require some similar kind of parameters, which would be the file name, which acts as a key in that case, and then a stream on which you would like it to write the file to. And then once it is in the stream, then you can process it the way you want it. Now inside this, if you haven't noticed, because I was working for a customer who needed specifically the download, not the upload part for some situations. In that case, what happens is there is no way that you can directly point to a file unless you know the ID of the file. So if you know the ID of the file, then it's a straight direct connection to that file. But if you don't know the ID of a specific file that you would like to download, then what you'll have to do is you will have to scan the whole folder and let user, and then based on the file name, find that individual file and download or put that into the stream. Now that gets tricky if you start thinking from the perspective of storing that data into a temp table, because there can be thousands of files. And that's where a very new, very important, not new for sure, data type is used, which is the dictionary data type, which is the dictionary of whatever you would like. Let's say text. When you fill in a dictionary, the first part kind of acts as a key, as a primary key if you think the dictionary as a table, and the second part is the value that you're scanning for. So consider it as a table with two fields, where the first field is the primary key, and you can start using that field to kind of scan the responses out of it. So let's start using that, which is, let's say, we'll do the clear again, and then we'll have to use a different URL in this case. So let's try to write that down. I should have it somewhere. The URL that you need for the download will be the graph API as it is, version 1.0. Site will be as it is, drive will be as it is, items will be as it is. And then inside the items, you will be scanning all the childrens that are there. Okay. Now, based on this URL call, it will scan everything that is inside this particular folder or this specific item, more or less. So what we can do is we can also kind of copy it as it is. Let's also copy this as it is. Download URL, which will require the site ID, the document library ID, and then the document folder ID, which is the folder that we are pointing to. And that's it. Don't need the file name and all. Okay. Based on this pass URL, it'll start knowing which folder to kind of scan and then read all the children's out of it. So we will, in this case, we are doing a get. So we'll change this to a get request. We'll get all the responses based on that folder. And then we'll call, as we do, graph API with the past URL and the JSON response because we are doing a get. So with this, we will get what we need out of that SharePoint library. Okay. So once we have everything that's get response out of it, we'll start reading the response, which is using my JSON response. If my this JSON response, it should surely return a array, which will be all the items, and then I'll have to store that into one of the JSON token. So let's copy that also. So everything of that value, which is the result of all the files that it found, will get stored in this token, and then I can surely do a custom thing in this case, which would be whatever is in the JSON token, I would like to read that JSON response into from the J token, which is the token, into my directory or my dictionary. With this new method that we are trying to build, convert none to a boolean. What happened to this? Cannot implicit convert none to a boolean. Where is the boolean? Oh, there is no if. Okay, just this. Okay, and I would like to get the value out of it. So how? Let's create this. It's not understanding it as a method. And then my J token will be my token into it, and then we'll start reading that into the dictionary that we have. Okay, J token as my JSON token, and my return value of SharePoint is as dictionary from here of text and text. Okay. So now what we'll do is we will have to convert this token into array. So let's create an array. SharePoint array, which is my JSON array. Now to get data from token into the array, we'll do this, which is JToken dot as array. This will convert everything that's there into the array that we have defined. Now for each item in that array, which is the SharePoint array, we'll do a single token. It will be a JSON token again. In my SharePoint array, I'll do something. Okay. Now, what we would like to do in that case is we would like to read whatever comes into an object. So that will be my J object, which will become my JSON object. So whatever is in the token, I'll convert that into the object to read it further, which will be my single token as object. Because once I have the object, I can do a get simply. I can do a if J object dot get the two parameters that will return out of it. One would be the name of the file that I'm interested, because that's my primary key more or less, and that value will get into my JSON token. If that is found, then I'll define a file name which will store my JSON token dot as value dot as text. This will the get, if it finds it, it will store the response into token, and I can convert a token into all available nav or business central data types. In the same way, the other thing that I'll need to download a file is the download URL, which we just used, which is this key. If I get this, okay, in my J token, then I'll convert that into, let's say, download URL from my same conversion. Okay, once I have both of these, which is of type what, text, and this is also of type text, I would like to use the file name as the key, the primary key more or less. What I'll do is I'll do a SharePoint dictionary dot add, and I'll define the first field which I would like to as key, which is the file name, and the second as the thing that I would like to fetch in the future. It will fetch, it will start reading this folder, and let me see if I have some dummy data so that I can upload it somewhere. Okay, AL is okay. Let's do this. Yes. Where is my SharePoint? Okay. Let's upload folder, which would be my. Let me pick a folder. Desktop. Okay. I'll use the current folder where we have everything from the code perspective, so that there are so many files. All right. So start placing all the files in this, which is quite a few files inside this. Now, when this code will run, this will start reading everything that's inside this main files folder, because that's our target folder. And it'll start loading all those files into this dictionary. Once the dictionary gets loaded out of the available option, then I can go back into my download SharePoint from SharePoint folder, and I have the SharePoint dictionary loaded. Once I have the dictionary loaded, I can directly start to call whatever I want, which is I can do my another request to my I can do another HTTP request this time. This will be again of type get, and this time I would like to download a specific file. Now, how I'll know which file it is I'll just do a SharePoint disk.get based on the file name that I would like to download. If I know the file name, and if I call this like this, Okay, and I'll get in return the download URL. So when I do a dictionary.get with the first field that I've added that acts as the primary key, it will return me the second part, which is the value that I'm looking for. So when I do this get, this will response me whatever the assigned value next to this, which will be the download URL. And that download URL, I can just directly do a get call to find that. If it is getting confused, let me know. But that will be again my, why this is understanding. Okay, oh sorry. It should understand it as it is. Happen to this. Okay. I can do my call graph API, which would require a pass URL, which would be my this. This is my URL that I would like to call. And then I'll need to get the JSON response that I'm getting out of that. And that JSON response should also bring me something into my stream. And if that returns true, or if that returns false, then the file is not downloaded, right? Download is equals to false. That file download will become actually the return parameter for this method, Boolean. Okay. I don't know why the colors are not being updating here. But this case, what I'm doing is a get call. And now if I go to the overload that for the call graph API that we created earlier, which is this one with the stream, I need to check what kind of call it is. Yes, it is a get. And in case of get, what it does, it just assigns the method get. And then does it need to write to stream? I think it need to write to stream. I think so. Because otherwise how the stream will kind of set itself. Okay, let's try that out here in begin. Because I have a stream, I need to set that stream to set. So I'll say content dot write. Oh, this is just writing back to that. I'll get the response into the stream. This will respond, okay, and then in the download, once I get this, and this, how this will get updated automatically. Let me see. Okay, so this gets the get, and here I have already written, yeah, read as a stream. So in case of get, the response when it is received, based on the response, I'm reading it in the stream. So the data in case of get is automatically getting read as a stream rather than as a response text. And the stream will store the file that I'm looking for so that I can start fetching it up. So before we run out of time, let's quickly call this somewhere. Download this. Let me duplicate this method as it is. Oh, this action as it is. Time. And then download file. Okay. And remove this. Need. Okay. SharePoint setup dot SharePoint. Is it SharePoint setup? Yeah. SharePoint setup dot download file from SharePoint, and I'll have to give it a file name. I'll kind of hard code it for that matter right now. Let's pick a file name from here. Let's pick this one. Okay. here. This will be the file name, and then the second parameter is a stream, which is my image stream. This will return a boolean, which is this. Okay, so if this is false, okay, I should have done it other way around here. If it returns true, because false is the default value, then file non-loaded is true. Okay. If this returns true, then download. Is there a download from stream? Yes, there is a download from stream. So let's do a download from stream, which then needs an in stream, which is this stream, and then it needs a dialog title, which is nothing because it's on SAS. To folder, we cannot specify that on SAS. To filter, nothing on SAS. And to a file. So let's do a file name. We will call it as sample.txt. Okay. Let's give it a file name. Okay. So if this works, this should start, this particular action should look for a file with this name in SharePoint. And if it is found, then we'll download that file with the name sample.txt. So let's try to let's try to publish this and see what happens. But the download scenarios, as I said earlier, will only be applicable if you have a reference of the either the file ID or the file name stored inside Business Central somehow. So if you would like to store the file name somewhere and then start searching for that file in SharePoint, yes, you can do that using this particular method that we just created. So let's try to do an export file. And okay, again, and unable to access URL. Seems weird. Why this will do that, and which URL it cannot access. Okay, let's wait for it. Okay, let's see what it is saying now. Export a file, and it should stop somewhere in the debugger. Okay, let's see where it is. I did somewhere wrong. The past URL is not show me. Okay. The graph API with site name, and then cannot copy this, which is weird. Oh, I can. Here it is. Let me drag it in here. So let's try to analyze this. This is doing a graph API with the site name. This is the site ID. And then this is the drive ID. And then we're looking for folders in the...
Spelling of children is wrong.
See, that's what happens. Even if when you have children's. Okay. So yeah, you can technically start looking for any graph URL for SharePoint, I'm saying, and then replace it with the right parameters that it's need. And then as we did in these last 3-4 sessions, you can actually start doing whatever you need. So what happened is the sample.txt is downloaded. I cannot open it because it contained my GitHub recovery codes, but I'm pretty sure it's the same file. I'll fetch the new recovery codes more or less, but here it is, which is the same file more or less, which is stored in here. So if you have the file name, and the file name in SharePoint would come with an extension also. You cannot search, or you cannot say that just the GitHub recovery code would be the name. It should be with the text.txt over there. So if somehow, if there is a situation where you are storing file name somewhere in a separate table related to a particular record, and you would like, in that case, download that file, then you can use this. Yes, Sandeep sir? You're saying something?
When we upload the file, does it
Yes.
give us the ID in the response?
In
It
the
does.
response, it does.
And we can
will
save
check
it, right?
that. Yes, if it, yeah, if the written URL gives us that ID, then we can save it. The only catch in that case would be that if the file is moved here and there, will that change the ID? No, it will not.
No, it will
Yes,
not.
we can store that. But the whole idea that you and me were discussing about either creating record links or the document attachment is not to store additional data. But yeah, that's possible what you're saying. That we get the file ID from the response and then store it somewhere.
So that's what I prefer the attachment, because we can get custom fields. Record link I would prefer not to touch.
Yes. Yeah. And instead of creating a separate field, I would rather say create a separate table and store the values against it like we did based on the record IDs. So you can then possibly use the same table for multiple uh, you know tables in Business Central, like for customer sales order and all. And the record ID would be the unique identifier for each record, because you can have 5 attachment per sales order maybe.
Yeah,
Right?
but when you create attachment, it does get linked to that particular record.
Yes, it does. Based on the record ID. That all happens based on the record ID.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you are planning to store the file names, what I'm saying is, then we can surely create a table with record ID and the file name as a parameter, or the file ID as a parameter, and then push data into that table whenever we are trying to upload a file, so that it's there. Okay, anything else? We are at the end of our meeting more or less at this point, and if we meet next week, which is still under debate, I'm not sure about the next week, but yeah, following week after that, I'll be open. So if we do meet next week, then it'll be just answering questions which are already available in the question box that we have on the website, because I haven't answered those for a while. And
Just
yes, sir, tell me.
yeah, and just I was in between looking at what was asked earlier in the session. There's a function called format number text, where number is
Yes,
spelled as NO. So it still
and it's
exists
in
in it's NO, not the number is not full. Format NO text.
1401.
Yeah, 1401.
Oh, it starts with the format. Okay, here it is, Sam. It's in this code unit called check translation management. The function is format number text.
Format number text, description line, check. Right, that looks about right. Okay, so
And
how do I
again,
use check trans?
this is check translation management, if I remember it correctly, because all the check functions have been moved to this check translation management.
Okay.
Which is again a report. And here is that method which we are looking for. Number text as an array, which will be responding you the converted text. And then the new language, new currency code are the parameter. And you can see the implementation of it in either in 1401 or in the same on this code unit. Or on this report, sorry. Yeah.
What is strange is on-premise has a different way of coding.
Yeah.
I don't have these things.
What's the different way?
Well, it has everything in the same check report only. There is no
1401?
separate code unit call. Yes, everything is in
I didn't-
1401.
I didn't want to write a code unit for that.
No, it's not a code unit. It's again a report, and maybe because I'm using a Docker of North America localization, this have moved here. But maybe Sandeep sir, as you're saying, in
This is
the Indian
localization.
version, yeah, this is the localized North America localization.
In
L400.
W1, it's still the same
In
1401.
the check. Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. Well, thank you, Sandeep. Thank you.
Okay. And Manish, did you get an idea about the API calls that we were talking about in LinkedIn?
Yes. Actually, I went through some videos, previous meeting videos. I'm getting some ideas.
Yeah, so Sandeep has an interesting question, which is around, can we put something in Business Central which will pull all my inbox, Outlook inbox inside my Business Central, which logically for me means two things: an understanding of Java control add-in, kind of have a refreshable part, and then the APIs to read that data. Any other thoughts on that?
Not as of now, but we can work on this.
Yeah,
There are mail APIs are there
Mhm.
in the same graph. We can pull those data through.
Yeah, but then you need understanding of control add-in so that it kind
Yes.
of be a refreshable component which refreshes after a time.
Yes.
Whatever we did here, it's more or less static. We need something which kind of refreshes it automatically.
Yeah, that can be managed.
Yeah.
I don't do Java
Actually,
scripting.
Saurav, I need to add something on this. I have
Go ahead.
searched for it. Actually, the requirement is to bring the inbox on the role center page, or it can be on the fact box or any document. So I actually searched for it. What I found by default is that there is email log setup from which we can capture the logs, capture the emails that are being received from the salesperson email address to the customer. So
Yeah.
it's on the assisted setup, I think.
Yeah,
It's there.
right. It's been there for a while, I guess.
If you go on the assisted setup, so there it is. Up, yes. Email log setup. There's an option.
Okay.
So from here, we have to actually set up. And it will reflect on the salesperson.
Track email
can
messages
explore this.
exchange between salesperson.
It was there earlier in the Navy also.
Yeah, it was there in the NAV. I knew that. I don't know
Okay.
now.
So
But I've
those
never used
those
it,
mail
so it's
can be
overburden.
pulled in the Business Central. So from there it can be done, but it's not completely what I'm looking for.
So what is the requirement?
To put the inbox in Business Central, Outlook inbox, more or less.
Let's discuss it next week. Probably
Yeah,
then
maybe.
I can
Yeah,
also do.
let's try it out. Let's see what we can.
Okay.
We'll play around with it, Manish. Not a problem.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah. Anything else, anyone? Otherwise, we are good for this week, and we'll try to meet next week. If that doesn't happen, then after that, I'll be available going forward.
Thank you. So it was
Thank you, sir.
pretty informative.
Thank you. So
Thank you.
thanks.
Thank
Thank you all. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Saurav.
Thanks, man.